All right, what's going on, everyone? We're going to do a quick Ukraine update here. We're going to talk about moves on the battlefield, including a projected move in the west that hasn't materialized, and I don't think will, Transnistria. There's a couple other areas where there's actually been fighting, and there's been a few changes we'll get into. Talk about a recent U.S. aid package that was announced today to be sent to Ukraine, because there's a couple items in there that haven't been sent before. We'll talk about what those are. And then finally, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to try to dispel a talking point that I think is being presented in bad faith. We'll get to that last. So Transnistria is this breakaway region of Moldova, which is west of Ukraine. It's a relatively small area, referred to sometimes as like a partially recognized state, kind of like a holdover from the Soviet Union. I think the last I heard, there were around 1,500 Russian soldiers there, and that was at the very start of the war. Right when, about a year ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was a lot of talk as to whether or not these Russian troops in Transnistria would be used in any capacity. Would they attack Ukraine from the west? Of course, now we know a year later, nothing has really come of that. But over the last week or so, there's been a lot of chatter that something could be happening in Transnistria. Russia's talking about how they will defend any attacks against Transnistria, suggesting that Ukraine might be trying to, liberate that area, or probably the actual advantage there is pretty significant munitions storage facilities that I'm sure either side would love to get their hands on. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. Both Russia and Ukraine are pretty occupied in other areas of this conflict. Moving on to where there actually is movement on the battlefield. Earlier this week, I talked a little bit about these kind of small offensives, maybe, that together are making up the Russian offensive for winter, potentially spring. Those are happening, moving south to north in Volodar, Marinka, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and Kreminna, and west of Kreminna. There really hasn't been much in terms of change of territory here over the last week or so. The only area that's really seen much change at all is Bakhmut. The lines to the south have remained pretty stable. There have been some reports of Russia making advances in the east, kind of pushing directly into or towards the center of Bakhmut. And then there has been some more territory gained by Russia on kind of the northwest side of Bakhmut. If you zoom out and look at this area, it continues to look like it has for a couple weeks or even months now, like the Ukrainian forces at Bakhmut are on the verge of being surrounded. So kind of the same thing there, slow but still steady progress by Russia. In terms of the other four areas, there's just not a lot of change. It reminds me of late spring, early summer last year, especially in eastern Ukraine, where there would be these little changes on the map day to day or week to week, but they weren't really changing control. It was more just contested territory. That's kind of what these four other areas look like right now. All right, moving on to the newest U.S. military aid package being sent to Ukraine. This was announced today on February 24th. It's an estimated total of $2 billion, which includes HIMARS ammunition, 155 millimeter ammunition, laser-guided rocket systems, and then 4 different types of drones: the Cyberlux K8, the Switchblade 600, which you probably have heard of before, the Altia 600, and the Jump 20. And we'll talk about what each one of these are. The Switchblade 300 got a lot of attention earlier in the war. This is the same thing, just a little bit bigger. These are man-portable, tube-launched loitering munitions, so they're not designed to gather intelligence. They're tipped with a warhead and designed to crash into their target. The Switchblade 300 had a little smaller warhead, like the size of a 40 millimeter grenade. That was really designed for more anti-personnel use, kind of, sort of, maybe against light-skinned vehicles. The Switchblade 600, which has a range of over 40 kilometers and can stay in the air for over 40 minutes, comes with an anti-armor warhead. So this is designed to take on bunkers, hardened targets, or armored vehicles. There's not a ton of information out there about the Cyberlux K8. I was able to find that it's a handheld quadcopter drone with a camera pre-installed, so nothing crazy there. It sounds like one of the pretty generic type drones that Ukrainians have been using quite a bit in this conflict for both surveillance and at times strapping weapons to them, turning them lethal. The Altia 600 is interesting. It can be launched from the air, sea, or ground. Says it has a range of over 200 miles and a loitering time of 3 to 4 hours, which is substantial, but not the most we're going to get out of this list. It does look like a pretty standard drone, like it's designed to be returned and reused. They say that it's modular and can be used for intelligence gathering, counter-UAS, SIGINT, or kinetic operations. But I think the kinetic use here would be strapping grenades or mortars to it and dropping them. This doesn't look like a loitering munition like the Switchblade 600 that would be flown directly into a target. Finally, we've got the Jump 20, which is a vertical takeoff and landing drone. This one has a supposed range out to 185 kilometers with an endurance over 14 hours. So that is a lot of time to monitor the battlefield. Now, the fact sheet for the Jump 20 doesn't say anything about kinetic options. It refers to it as a multi-sensor intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance asset, but it does say that it comes with a usable payload capacity of up to 30 pounds. So where there's a will, there's a way. All right, the last thing to hit on here is debunking what I kind of considered a bad faith argument. I had a friend send me a Twitter thread recently. I'll see if I can dig it up. I don't want to call the person out, though, so we'll see. Anyways, the gist of it was this person saying that the United States has now subsidized the Ukrainian military to like 90% of what Russia spends on their military, and Ukraine isn't making a ton of progress. They're asking for more, which he presented as evidence that something fishy is going on. Now, there's a ton of different opinions out there. Plenty of people think we should be sending more to Ukraine. Others think we should be sending less. I just don't think this argument comparing military budgets is painting an accurate picture. Here's what I mean. It's not like a military starts over every year and their current capacity is directly proportional to their current level of funding. Whatever they've spent in the past goes into building that current force. I found some data on military budgets from 2017 to 2020. Maybe there's something more recent. If there is, I would imagine that it's at least the same general trend, but work with me here. So from 2017 to 2020, the Russian military spent between 60 and 65 billion on defense. That comes out to $260 billion over 4 years. That same period of time, Ukraine spent between $4 and $6 billion on defense per year, which comes out to around $20 billion over 4 years. Now, according to the most recent U.S. fact sheet for aid to Ukraine, we've spent about $30 billion on their military. So again, if we just look at this last 4-year period, that brings us to $50 billion for Ukraine against $260 billion for Russia. So yes, if you look at just 1 year, the United States, the European Union, and a bunch of other countries around the world have contributed enough to Ukraine to where their military budget is approaching that of Russia in this 1 year time period. But the two countries weren't starting from the same place when this war kicked off, not even close. So if Ukraine's allies are trying to build up their military to the point where they can hold off Russia, of course it's going to be a pretty substantial surge. And even this, 50 billion versus 260 billion, is still just 20% of what Russia has spent over the last 4 years. Look, there's a ton of nuance to that conversation, and I'm sure I didn't get all of these numbers exactly right. Hopefully they're at least in the right ballpark. I just don't think that comparing military budgets during the first 12 months of this war is in any way definitively showing evidence that something is all wrong. But that's all I got for now. Hope you all have a great weekend. I'll see y'all next time.